SCHD is having its worst year on record, both on an absolute basis and against the S&P 500. Not only is SCHD down 6% this year, but it's trailing the S&P 500 by 7%. This is not the performance we've come to expect from SCHD. After all, it's outperformed the S&P 500 over each of the last 5 years. So, what gives? Has SCHD lost its magic? Were we just duped by a few good years of outperformance, and now we're stuck holding a fund that's going nowhere? After all, it's the past performance of SCHD, up nearly 70% over the last 5 years, and almost 190% over the last 10. That's a huge reason why it's become such a popular, if not the most popular, dividend ETF on the market. So let's look into why SCHD is tanking this year, and figure out if this is just a short-term fluctuation, or something that might develop into a more long-term trend that we should worry about. In a recent video, I went over some big changes that SCHD underwent as part of its annual reconstitution of its holdings, where the fund sells and drops out some companies that have been underperforming and no longer meet its screening criteria, and adds in new companies to replace them. You'll remember SCHD has pretty strict screening criteria for the stocks it includes as part of the ETF, and it only holds 100 stocks in total. So this yearly reconstitution is a big deal. And as part of those changes in 2023, some of the top weighted stocks in the entire ETF changed as well. If you remember, there were a couple key additions to the SCHD ETF. Blackstone, UPS, Chevron, and Ford were all major additions. But the number one weighted stock in the entire ETF was also a brand new addition in 2023, and that was AbbVie. Ticker symbol ABBV. And as of that reconstitution of the SCHD ETF back in March, AbbVie held the number one spot in SCHD, making up 4.26% of the ETF at that time. And well, from the time AbbVie was added as the number one holding to the ETF, to the time I sit here now talking to you, AbbVie is down 13.5%. And those other new additions? They're not performing much better. UPS is down 10% since the rebalancing, Chevron is down 4%, and the only one of those additions that's actually up as I sit here and film this is Ford, which is up over 10%. But unfortunately for us, Ford was a much smaller weighting in the ETF than all those others were when it was added. And many of those new additions to SCHD, including AbbVie and Chevron, had really outperformed the market before being added into SCHD. So was SCHD just buying at the top for these stocks? And it's possible, because while AbbVie still scores high on all the metrics that SCHD screens for, free cash flow, return on equity, and dividend growth, it has poor estimated sales and revenue growth rates based on their latest earnings forecasts. And these are the numbers that are really going to drive the share price in the market, and what's essentially been driving the stock price of AbbVie down. But is this an AbbVie problem, or is this an SCHD problem? And if we look, the 25 stocks that got dropped from SCHD back in March are up around 3% since those changes, while the 25 stocks that got added into SCHD are down 1.5%. So it's possible that SCHD, by not really considering any forward growth metrics as part of its screening criteria, will get into the habit of selling low and buying high each time it rebalances the fund. Still though, this is only 6 months of bad performance versus years of growth and outperformance versus the S&P 500. So I'm not going to jump to any rash conclusions.
It was a jump to conclusions, Matt.
About SCHD long term based on such a short and small sample size. And one of the other major worries people had back in March when the ETF rebalanced was how heavy its holdings were in the financial sector. At the time of the rebalancing, the Silicon Valley Bank collapse was still fresh in the news, and the outlook for regional banks as a sector was extremely negative. Now, when we look at the top financial holdings of SCHD, it's a bloodbath. We have US Bank down 27%, Allstate down 17%, and a few more regional banks. M&T Bank down 12%, Fifth Third Bank down 18%, Regions Financial down 14%. T. Rowe Price is the only financial stock in the top 40 holdings of SCHD that is actually up on the year. And that one? Only up 2.5%. And the worries were how heavy SCHD was in financials. Financials still make up 15% of SCHD, and regional banks make up a large chunk of that 15%. Just adding to SCHD's troubles. But it's really not even the fact that SCHD has 15% of its holdings in financials that's the problem. It's just that the fund is holding the wrong financial companies in this market. JP Morgan Chase is up 5%. Visa is up 8%. American Express up nearly 20%. So there are winners out there in the financial sector. It's just a shame that they're not the companies that SCHD is currently holding. So those are some of the SCHD specific problems that have been dragging the ETF down. But how big of a problem are they really? And I think the way to answer that is by digging a little deeper into the performance not of SCHD, but of the S&P 500, which has just officially entered bull market territory once again. This is the heat map of the S&P 500's year-to-date performance. Can you find the answer to all of our questions here? Look at those huge green squares. Those are the largest companies in the index, and also the largest gainers for the year. Microsoft, Apple, Google, all up over 40%. Nvidia, up almost 200%, carrying the entire semiconductor industry with it. Meta and Tesla are both having huge comebacks, both up well over 100% year to date. Amazon is up over 50%. But outside of those stocks, there's not a ton of bright green to be found here. Entire sectors like healthcare, energy, utilities, all in the red. So sure, the S&P 500 index is up on the year, and SCHD is down, but the performance of the S&P 500 is being carried by just a small number of companies. The wealth isn't spread throughout the index. No pun intended. So unless you're investing in an ETF that holds some of these big tech names that are carrying the S&P 500, it's quite obvious that you're probably not having a great year so far. And the good news, or bad news, depending on how you want to look at it for SCHD, is that there's almost a full year left to go until SCHD will shake up its holdings again. So there's plenty of time for the ETF to benefit from a rebound in some of those financial companies that have been so beaten down, or a rebound in some of its top new additions like AbbVie or UPS. But this should be a harsh reminder why it's never a good idea to be all in on any specialty ETF, even one as highly regarded as SCHD. These kind of ETFs should only be complements in your portfolio to the larger, more broad index funds like the S&P 500 or the total stock market index. I think SCHD will be fine in the long term. Its screening metrics are the best of any dividend ETF on the market, in my opinion. And its 100 holdings makes sure that it only holds what are the best of the best stocks based on that criteria. But until the stock market rebound extends beyond just those huge tech names, don't expect SCHD or any other ETF to be outperforming that S&P 500 index.